USF, Universal Service Fund, oh my gosh, 32%, is that the number I heard today? Mike, you had a panel, a very good panel about the future of USF. There's a lot of uncertainty. Why don't you kind of give us your takeaway from that panel? We'll have a conversation.
Sure. So I love to say it's half glass full, half glass empty. I think one of the panelists said that today, and I think that's true. We face some challenges as an industry. Right now, the contribution factor, as you noted, Ken, is 32.5%. It's fluctuated around 30 for a while. The problem is we've tied it to legacy telecommunications revenues that are no longer relevant in today's marketplace. So just as we've started to fund broadband and drive it to more into these markets, we should also be looking for broadband to support these systems as well. So finding a way to have broadband be supportive of universal service, contribute to it, I think is important. And also look at other beneficiaries, users of these systems. We mentioned today on stage, for example, edge providers, so large tech companies who use these networks, depend on these networks for their business and are driving billions of dollars of revenue through them. We're not asking them to carry the full weight, but can they carry a fair share? And so that's one of the conversations as well. But this is so critically important because all the things that we've talked about in terms of these programs, all of the results we've seen to date in terms of rural broadband, they depend in large part upon these programs. And so the sustainability, viability of these is critical. I think we're at an inflection point where we've got an opportunity to advance the debate, but there's also, of course, the risk that comes with that, because if you don't execute, it does place these programs at greater risk.
Well, it talked about the idea of service, the fact that you've got these devices out there, but you have to continue to maintain them. A truck roll isn't 60 miles.
That's right. Oh, exactly. I always like to compare it to, and I'll be in calls in my office, for example. There's more people in the apartment building behind me in my office sometimes than there are in some of these serving areas our members operate in. And so it's not done when the network's built. You have the continuing obligation to answer trouble calls. You have the continuing obligation to upgrade your network. You've got the cost of middle mile connecting you from these deeply rural markets to large tier 1 internet points of presence. All of those things cost money. The network is not, it's no mission accomplished banner flown when the network's built. And so I think looking at it and thinking about universal service as the ongoing sustainability of service, the ongoing affordability of service is a critical component of this. It's been often overlooked in the rush to reach the unserved. Both of those are important missions, and I think hopefully we'll see more equal attention to those, especially as we move past a grant phase and into the how do you make sure that people continue to get what was promised to them when all these networks were built.
And you have these things like a Thursday night football. We heard an example of a peak demand that wasn't there a year ago.
That's right. I mean, so for example, right, it used to be it would be over the air on a cable network specifically, or an IPTV network, let's say. Nowadays, this is happening over your streaming broadband video, and that places greater strains on these systems, especially with live programming, where it's harder, at least, to engineer the network to put it local to the customer in question. You're drawing from a distant signal. That's placing greater strains on networks and putting a lot more work on the capacity in the middle mile, for example. Those connections between rural and urban areas. So, accommodating for that, accounting for that, thinking about how do you make sure that everybody, again, who benefits from that transmission is contributing to the existence of the networks that make it happen. It's a critical part of the conversation we need to be having.
Well, and it was some interesting numbers. That 32% could go to 4% if it included all the broadband subscribers.
Yes, exactly. So, I look at this as multiple pieces of the puzzle. You've got, on the one hand, broadband users who right now are not contributing. And again, you don't want to suppress broadband demand, but we've looked at this in studies, and we found, and no one's refuted these studies over the last several years, we put them out repeatedly, that if you did a relatively small 4% or so assessment on broadband, no one is going to cancel a $100 broadband service because of a $4 assessment on their bill. In fact, we saw providers during the pandemic put inflationary charges on their bills. No one canceled broadband. So you don't want to overstress the system, but you also want to find a way to spread the burden more equitably across so many users. If you brought the contribution factor down to 4% by including broadband, for example, and then you brought these edge providers into the mix, you could bring down that contribution level to a nearly infinitesimal level that truly spreads the burden broadly and equally across everybody in the ecosystem who benefits.
And so from a legal standpoint, it sounds like there's stuff going through the court system right now. What happens if USF is overturned?
Yeah, so it's a great question, Ken. So as we talked about in this panel this morning, there are court challenges to the entire sort of existence of universal service, if you will, challenging whether the FCC can collect the funds that we just talked about in order to support the mission of universal service. We think we have great arguments against those challenges. We think that the law is in the favor of those who've relied upon this system for years, and the FCC is defending it. If a court were to come out with an adverse ruling, and if it were to cease the ability of the FCC to collect contributions, this would have a significant and severe effect on rural consumers, schools, hospitals, libraries, low-income consumers, rural healthcare clinics. For example, one of the things we did is we looked at it from our members' perspective, asked our members, what would the impact be? They would probably have to double their monthly rates or more for service in order to make sure they could just continue to provide service to those customers. In addition, it would put severe brakes on the ability for them to invest going forward. They would basically be at that point in the process of trying to conserve in order to preserve what they've got in place. Neither of those results is a result that anyone wants. So we hope both on the policy and on the law will come out ahead in the end.
Well, it looks like your plate is going to continue to be full, Mike.
It is. But the energy here and this sort of thing, it's great, and we're excited to do it with our members.
Excellent. Mike, great catching up with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was wonderful.